Kia ora koutou. Now mai, haere mai. Welcome to the last of our 4 talks in the spring talk series Psychology Bite-Sized, brought to you by Te Kura Matai Hinengaro, School of Psychology of Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. Very good to see you all again. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome our speaker for today, which is Dr. Matt Hammond, yes, who is a social psychologist, if I may say so, and a senior lecturer here in our school. And he's investigating factors that have an impact on romantic relationships. So don't get your hopes up. He's not going to fix your relationship just now, but he knows everything around what type of factors around a relationship within the person, but also around the relationship play a role in actually if it is successful or maybe not. And one thing that he's also really investigating quite thoroughly is biases that people might have in their perspective of others. And so, for example, one being sexism, being one of those potential biases and stereotypes that can have an impact. And this actually is quite strongly linked to gender. So this is where his expertise comes in, where he's going to talk about today about gender biases and how they might play a role in especially also the workplace, I think. And so we're very, very pleased that Matt is going to share his knowledge around that and maybe has some very important insight and tips for you.
Oh, you'd hope so.
Oh, and before I forget, please put your questions into the Q&A box. We can answer them later. In the second half of the session, we're going to answer all your questions. And I think Matt is going to use the chat function as well. So keep that close and open.
Kia ora, everyone. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And I also need to grab the chat for myself. Nice, it's so nice to see everyone. So I'll start with a brief pepeha ko Oiraka Toku Maunga. This is Oiraka in Auckland. I really like this old photo because Oiraka is now covered in houses and you can't really see it's a mountain anymore, but it is. Underneath all of those houses, it is a mountain. Ko Kaipara Toku Awa. This is the Kaipara River, which is north of Auckland, where all of my family are from. And so this is kind of home to me. Ko Ngāti Pākehā Toku Iwi, ko Matt Hammond Toku Ingoa. It's nice to be here. I'm here to talk to you about gender discrimination. And like Hedvig introduced me, I come at it from an angle of relationships. I am most interested in the things that make people hook up and break up and the bits in between hooking up and breaking up. And one of the massive takeaways from all of that research is that we don't exist in an objective world. Our relationships aren't what we think they are. We bring in all of these kinds of things into our relationships, such as gender and gender attitudes, that fundamentally changes what it means for us to live in our relationships. So if you want to study relationships, you also have to study gender. So today's talk is going to be bringing some of the applied research, and I'm going to talk through 3 key points around gender discrimination and how they apply to the workplace. I'll start with running you through social categories. We'll talk about gender prejudice and how to counter prejudice. So we'll start with a riddle, and I'll use the chat panel here to look at your answers. Here is the riddle. A father and son are in a disaster. The father is pronounced dead at the scene. The son is rushed to the hospital, and just as he's headed into the operating theatre, the surgeon says, "I can't operate. That boy is my son." Explain in chat. We have a couple of very quick onto the ball answers. Any more answers on top of this? Yeah, we have a bunch of stuff of of the surgeon as a mother, which is actually the correct answer. And I don't actually care about this. Some people treat this like it's a test of your sexism, and if you don't know if it's a mother, then you're sexist, which is annoying and wrong. It's not the case. The entire point of that was to see social categories. In your mind, you've got social categories of things that are linked together, like what it means to be a parent. And now we're finally coming into it, because yes, the original answer that was supposedly correct to this riddle is that the surgeon is mother. In fact, if you ask university-aged people nowadays this same riddle, they are more likely to say the boy has two fathers and the surgeon is just his other father, and that's just how it is. So depending on either where you heard this riddle the first time or the salient category in your brain, you try and solve this in a logical way that makes sense to the categories that you know. One of the ways that we know that you're doing something logical is we can give the same riddle to children. And if you ask children, they say the doctor is a robot. The doctor, this is the best answer of all of them, so everyone here is less good than children. The doctor is a ghost of the father who died and now he's back as a surgeon to save his son. It's the best answer ever. Or the entire thing is a dream. And what this shows in children's research is that they haven't really developed the social categories yet to link together father, surgeon, and what it means. They're kind of just presented with a silly question and they give you a silly answer like, it's all a dream, it's a ghost, leave me alone. Why are you asking me questions? So in your heads right now, you've got these social categories, which is good. It's really good that you've got these social categories. Things that are connections of places and professions and relationships and people and groups. All of these things you need to survive. One of the ways that social categories help you survive is they add information without you realizing it a lot of the time. An example of this, of how social categories add information, is check out this headline, which says something like, person reunited with animal. That is a bad headline, right? This headline, Auckland woman reunited with cat. That's an exciting headline. We're like, ooh, there's a woman from Auckland. This woman is reunited with a cat. Person reunited with animal is the same actual amount of information as this. You don't know this woman, you don't know this cat, but it feels like you do, right? It feels like you know what cats are like and what women are like, and you can kind of build this information into the story to make it feel like you know way more than you actually do. Social categories is also really useful in your brain for removing information. Your brain needs to delete information a lot of the time. Like if you're crossing a busy street and there are hundreds of people, imagine if your brain was doing the same thing you do in your romantic relationships or with your family and friends and going, what are they thinking and feeling right now? What does this person want for dinner? Where are they going? What are their goals? Every single person out of 100 people that you meet, your brain had to do that. Like, I wonder if they like broccoli or not. I wonder where they're going. Instead, your brain actually just deletes this. You use social categories to turn all of those faces into one group or objects who are in your way, and your only purpose is to avoid the objects. They don't have feelings or thoughts anymore. Your brain needs to do that to be able to continue on with what you're doing. One of my favorite examples of this is, it's a phenomenon called civil inattention, and you most often feel it when it breaks, when it shifts. If you've ever been at a supermarket, just doing your job, and then you see someone at the supermarket who you know, and your brain does like a slow motion bend, where you're like, oh, suddenly I'm in a different frame entirely. That's the civil inattention turning off. It's turning off we're categorizing everyone here as a meaningless individual. Suddenly I need to do the exact opposite, which is to say, this person has thoughts and feelings and I need to be a human being in front of them. It's a really fascinating system in our brains. So altogether, what I'm trying to tell you is this, that social categories are just ways that we process or we fail to process the world. we have to use these to be able to survive. There's a big but on this, which is but the world is not reliable. The world is not at all useful with the information that it gives us to build these categories. If you're scrolling through Netflix and you see an ad for the show about surgeons, the ad says, oh, look at this, there's a man surgeon. If you're really invested in firefighting and you look at a firefighter in Wikipedia, this is the photo you get. You can go right now and check. You get to see this lovely looking mustachioed man who's a perfect stereotype of what it is to be a firefighter. If you're doing a PowerPoint presentation and you want to show pictures of CEO and you type in CEO into Google, you're going to be presented with a lot of these men. And as you go through the world, you're collecting information to put in your categories. And information like surgeon, firefighter, CEO turns out to be a strong white man, and equally information about what it means to be a secretary or a nurse or a primary school teacher. All of those categories get paired with the other things like being a kind white woman. So the key takeaway here is this, is that your brain does that, and it's good that your brain does that. Everyone needs social categories to be able to navigate the world. Unfortunately, the world is full of stuff that makes these social categories wrong. So social categories are not true, and they're also not how the world should be. That's what's being presented to us, but part of our job as human beings is to start protecting ourselves from the biased information we get, or if we recognize our brains are full of this, to act in ways that make sure we don't reinforce these. And that's where we're moving now from social categories into gender prejudice. Gender prejudice is judging someone more negatively or positively based on their gender. That's it. Easy definition there. So I can reframe this as, this is saying who men, women, non-binary, non-gendered people, who they are and who they should be. So those first bits, those are the social categories. We can't really help having that. We have to have this. We have to have an idea in our heads of what it means to be in the men category, in the woman category, and in the non-binary category. Otherwise, we couldn't live our lives. This bit over here, that's the stereotyping and the prejudice. That is when you say, what I have in my head is what the world is and what the world should be. The world should be what I have in my head. So let's go through kind of how this happens. I'm about to show you a bunch of faces. The faces look like these faces here. And I can promise you that you can say anything you want about these people. The reason you can say anything you want without hurting their feelings is that none of these people are real. They're all fake. They're all fake people. They don't exist. It's the coolest thing in the world. And if I had 3 more hours of the seminar, it would be 3 hours of us going to this website and clicking refresh to see new faces. This is machine learning generated faces. And if you haven't seen it before, you're so welcome for the rest of your evening. But I'm going to show you faces from here. So they're not real people. You can't hurt their feelings. So let's start. And I'm going to, I'll get you to do it in chat first, and then I'll show you some of the answers that students have come up with or other people I've presented to have come up with. So what I want you to do in chat is describe this person here. Describe it. What's she like? What's she do for a job? What traits does she have? Office job or accountant? I like it. Yeah, I get, certainly I get office job accountancy vibes from that. I like that. Adult able-bodied person, could be doing anything. Affluent and educated. Her name is Karen. She sells real estate. She is a real estate seller. That's my favorite one so far. She's really concerned with her appearance, and she sends back her coffee. It's not hot enough. Salesperson. Any more for this person here? A lawyer. Oh yeah, I think she'd be a good lawyer. Here's what some other people have come up with. She's politically conservative. She's polite, but she's quick to anger. She's concerned that her home looks nice. My favorite one of all time is that she likes visiting wineries. All right, what about this chap here? Let's describe him. What does he do for a job? What's he like? What is he like as a human being? Would you want to hang out with him? Tell me a bit about him. He's an actor. Yeah, I can see him being an actor. He's got an actorly beard. Could be a comedian. TV anchor, host shows. Oh, so he's universally someone who was in front of other people. IT security. Confident and successful, a tech CEO. Plumber. Yeah. Let's get one more for this chap. Charismatic, but he knows he's good looking. Yeah, that puts me off too. This guy, he knows he's hot, so he makes him less hot. Other people have said he's in a high status job. That actually came up here as well. CEO in finance, maybe. He has a younger romantic partner. He likes adrenaline activities, apparently. He likes jumping out of planes and going surfing. And finally, describe this person. Describe them. What are they like? Student, psych major. Computer programmer. A social worker. Oh, I like these answers. What qualities? What kind of person? Non-binary, board game geek. Down to earth and nerdy in a good way. Bit shy. Nice person, a bit shy. Loves chess kind. Yeah, nailed it. When people see this person, they go politically liberal, works in IT, they're non-judgmental, they're a bit nerdy, they're a bit shy. That's pretty amazing, right? How did your brains do that? Your brain is doing something really interesting with stereotypes here, where we all tend to fall along the exact same kinds of judgments that we start making about people. So when presented with a woman, for example, there are these social categories that get linked with women that came up. So someone who's empathetic, who's aware of morals, who's slightly vulnerable to harm, perhaps someone who is overly emotional, socially competent, but maybe too socially competent where they could be manipulative socially or sexually, as well as being competitive. For men, often CEO, resilient, capable, providers, logical, decisive, someone who's unemotional, perhaps sexually unaware or socially unaware, and aggressive. So what we're doing here is we've been asked to infer information. We were asked to infer information about people who I explicitly told you don't exist. So that's the hardest job of all, right? Is you had to come up with traits about people who don't even exist in the world. So there's no way you could be right. But somehow, all of those answers cluster around these same things. And that's because when we're asked to do that, when we're asked to come up with information about a human being, we go to our stereotypes. We go to our social categories of who people are and who they should be. I think the super obvious application of this is, imagine you're at a workplace and you have to infer a lot of information about someone based on very little stuff. You get a CV and that CV has a name, a gender identity there, and you have to go, would this person be good for an IT job? Would they be nice to work with? Would they fit in with a nerdy culture, or would they fit in with our skydiving, surfing culture? All of this information starts getting filtered through our stereotypes instead of through what is actually happening in the world. That pattern I told you about, of this kind of different things that get linked with being women and being linked with being men is part of what is called ambivalent sexism. Ambivalent sexism was discovered, labeled by Peter Glick and Susan Fisk a long time ago, and it has stood the test of time. It's one of my favorite psych theories out of every single psych theory ever. It's that good. And every single country where researchers have gone to measure people's beliefs about gender, they did the exact same thing that your brains just did then. Women being empathetic, capable, maybe a bit touchy around how they look, and really emotional at times. Men being unemotional but logical. These things come up in every single country where they are measured in the world. So the takeaway here is that these are all prejudices, and prejudices contain positive bits and negative bits. And positive here isn't meant to say they're good things. Positive here is just the valence of the word. Like empathetic is a positive word, because if someone told you you are empathetic, that feels good. If someone told you you are not empathetic, that feels bad. So that's where positive comes from. It's not making any claims about the effects, which are all bad effects. All of these effects have disadvantages. And this is kind of the crux of my talk today. It's one of the really most difficult things to change in gender discrimination is figuring out all of the things that can make up gender discrimination. So my job right now is to convince you of how those positive sounding words have disadvantages. First of all, positive words that are attributed to different groups emphasize opposition between groups and difference between groups. So if I say women are kind, men are strong, although those are positive words for each group, it emphasizes those two groups as really different and perhaps in opposition to one another. Research overwhelmingly shows that women and men are mostly the same on just about everything you can possibly measure. The overlaps are so high. There is always more variation within any gender than when you're comparing different gender groups. So men are more different to other men than men on average are different to women on average. Another problem with these positive prejudices is that they tend to kind of cluster around particular groups, and so they're not allowed to belong to other groups. If you have a third gender possibility, not only is that gender in opposition to the first two, those first two have already taken kind and strong. And so now we're left with things like shy, nerdy. All of these things try and separate out in our minds to be clear categories. So when we have really strong stereotypes that belong to a particular gender, we end up excluding and perhaps opposing all other categories. Positive prejudices also remove your personal autonomy and your choice. Because you look at these and you go, ah, oh, these are nice words. Women being empathetic and sensitive, men being logical and resilient. Why can't we all just learn to accept our own strengths and get along in the world? The reason is because that might work for you, or it might work for someone who's made a career out of being logical and resilient as a man. But for people in that group who don't want to do that thing, they're out of luck. So you get headlines that look like this. You go, where have all the women CEOs? Well, where have they gone is the wrong thing to say. They were never there in the first place. Where are all the women CEOs to begin with? And where are all the men teachers? Where have they all gone? Even when someone succeeds in a particular workplace, it's still not given them their own autonomy over that success. So here is a recent story from this week from the New York Times. And the story is an account of someone who was a Black woman who succeeded in the workplace and then was told that success was due to diversity programs, was not due to any qualities of the human. It was due to these characteristics that meant there were all of these advantages. So there is no more autonomy and no more choice now, because people are saying, this is a group that has all of these advantages. Take, for example, something like women being vulnerable to harm. This is a really huge gender gap that comes up in fisheries. Fisheries in the United States is one of the most highly paying jobs you can get. And it's one of the most gigantic gender gaps that exist as well. Here are the actual statistics of fishing permit holders who are women on the left-hand graph, those little things there, numbers of people, and on the right-hand graph, numbers of men. Like a staggering number, right? And you can see how this directly ties into beliefs about women being vulnerable to harm, because that vulnerability to harm is linked in with the fishing industry being a really dangerous profession. Now, guess what? The fishing industry is a really dangerous profession. So who do you put in that profession? The people who are less vulnerable to harm. And then they all die. They all get killed because it's a really dangerous profession. So we have a gender inequality over here that is just a straight mirror of that first gender inequality. This positive ascription to a gender group of, they need protection from harm, means that they get excluded from these jobs. And on the other hand, men have this inequality here of being much more likely to be killed at work. So what I really want you to take away from this is that seemingly positive and negative prejudices, they disadvantage just all of us. Everyone here loses out in some way because of positive ascriptions that are for other groups that are then omitted from your own group. And I've left out a big chunk that I don't need to explain to you about how bad negative prejudices are. Obviously, negative prejudices are really bad for you, but they also do disadvantage everyone. The people who really strongly hold negative beliefs are not happier for it. They don't think of themselves as better people. They're not happier with their own lives. In a bunch of my research, specifically on relationships, I show that the least satisfied people out of everyone in relationships are people who hold really strongly negative, hostile, sexist attitudes. Those are the people who are least equipped to deal with the realities of living in a real life, real world relationship. So this is, it's bordering on that, the fantasy of someone who is sitting there and they're looking out at all of the negativity in the world and thinking to themselves, man, they must be feeling insecure and bad about themselves. But that is kind of what is happening. That is at least empirically, there's a lot of evidence that those people are the least happy. So let's get into the more positive side. I say more positive with some hesitancy there, because if we knew how to counter prejudice, we would have done it. If social psychologists had the secret all along, we wouldn't hide it, we would tell everyone, and we would counter it. So what I'm going to share with you are some steps toward countering prejudice and some steps toward reducing gender discrimination, as well as some things to look out for and some common mistakes to avoid. So the first common mistake is to look at instances of gender discrimination. And you don't even need to go back a month in the news. You can type this into Google anytime you want and just get a horrific amount of information. And often that information gets phrased like this, that there is bullying, that there is sexual assault and harassment as part of a boys' club. And what these are trying to do, really appropriately, is target that cluster of negative attitudes down the bottom left. They're saying, oh, there is all this aggression that is directed towards women as being overly emotional or competitive. There is all of this fighting that is pushing down. And what we need to do as a company is to get rid of all of the hostility, and then we'll be okay. So that's where that sits. And I 100% agree with that, as long as it is not the point at which you stop. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the time, people think that that's where it stops. Guess what happens though, if you present a huge report saying women in this company are victims of harassment and sexual assault and they need more protection, is you reinforce the other prejudices. You reinforce this idea that women are particularly vulnerable to harm, that are particularly aware of morals and culture, that men are particularly sexually unaware, that men are aggressive and men are unemotional. We know from all of our research that those attitudes as well feed into those same problems that are trying to be addressed. So a culture that has a lot of harassment, that has a boys' club, that is the same culture that emphasizes women being vulnerable to harm. That is the same culture that emphasizes men being unemotional and aggressive and competitive with other men for status. So a common mistake is kind of giving up once you've done the hostility towards women and forgetting the prejudice comes in lots of different flavors. This is not just my research. This is research by Jennifer Eberhardt, who I think is probably one of the world leading researchers in how to change prejudice. Her research is based in the States, so focuses a lot on prejudice towards African Americans, but the underlying principles are the same across all kinds of prejudices. Her research consistently says, if you just point out an inequality, that makes things worse. If you say, we have a group over here, they are really disadvantaged, and that group is already stereotyped as being emotional, empathetic, vulnerable to harm, just labeling that inequality is only going to reinforce those existing stereotypes, which make them relatively disadvantaged. So Jennifer Eberhardt says, you need to use those inequalities to identify biases. You need to use those inequalities to challenge the things that make up all of the harassment, all of the discrimination. If you are pointing it out, you are probably not helping and potentially just making things worse. So instead, researchers tend to recommend what is called coordinated cultural change, which is actually quite good for you as a human being because the responsibility is not just on you, the responsibility is on everyone around you as well, and your entire organization. So coordinated cultural change requires a targeted message that is widely shared amongst people. So it's kind of like a social movement. What that change does is it adjusts the normative beliefs. So a famous example of this most recently was the Me Too movement. So this is a movement that wasn't just pointing out inequality. It was using a really gigantic widespread inequality in an effort to change bias. And it did that by personalized messages of people's actual experiences with harassment and spread through social networks. So statistically, researchers have shown that tolerance of sexual assault has reduced across time as a result. You can never say it's causal, but across time, that time sequence did the stock market ticker thing of dropping with the exact precision that you'd expect if it was due to the Me Too movement. Another common mistake is that it's really tough to get rid of those positive prejudices. I mean, and I know it's all of these just sound like nice words. But like I said, if you have nice words attributed to your group, unfortunately, you get the pain of omission because you are not the nice words that are attributed to other groups. So if I were to tell you about my two friends, one of my friends is very smart and the other one of my friends is very, very pretty. What your brain just did was like, well, the smart one is nerdy, likes books, likes science fiction, but is not at all popular, probably a bit ugly, no one likes them. The pretty one has lots of friends, very sociable, is very dumb. But I didn't say any of those things. But your brains did it, right? When I'm like, one of them is smart, one of them is pretty. It's because omitting information is actually very sneaky and our brains pick up on it. So when you're trying to coordinate these social changes, a mistake is to say, our bunch of CEOs are not diverse enough. All of our CEOs need to be more diverse, and we've fixed this problem. You haven't fixed the problem. You've fixed half of the problem. The other half is saying, we need to put men in roles where men get to be empathetic, sensitive, express emotions. So all of this requires coordinated cultural change where if you are trying to shift stereotypes, they have to shift in both directions. Otherwise, it doesn't really go anywhere. So what this is relying on is that when you've got multiple diversity in all of your positions, it's really useful for role modeling for future generations. And I'll tell this to you, if you are currently in charge of a company or hiring decisions, diversity experimentally and in kind of longitudinal psychological research where we're tracking people over time and seeing how groups change, groups that are more diverse are just straight up better at being a group. So they're better at problem solving, they're better at getting goals done, they're better at engaging with other people, they're more creative groups. And it's obvious why. If you've got lots of different experiences, lots of different networks that make up the people in the group, you don't have redundancy. You don't have people who are doing the exact same job. So if you need to sell this kind of change to someone, you can sell it as a net positive for the success of a business. So I've talked a bit about let's fix the world, which is true, but also can make people feel a bit like, oh, great, all I need to do, Matt, is just fix society and just fix the organization I work in, and then we'll be okay. And so, yeah, I definitely hear you. So if we zoom this down into, okay, what can you do specifically? What can you do is you can find ways to individuate people. We know already from this talk, you've got a brain full of social categories. All of those social categories have a bunch of stuff about women and men already in there. And your brain will rely on that. Anytime you're asked to infer information, make some judgments of someone. So the more you can find ways to individuate people, find information specifically about them, the better you will be at judging them. Regardless of whether you're judging a new hire, you're judging someone who's coming up for a promotion, you're judging a boss of yours and giving a feedback form of how good they are at being a boss, all of those judgments will be better if you individuate them. So one of the things you can do is make sure that you're following things that are not relying on categories. So in a job interview panel where you're selecting someone, your job position can say something like this, of like, how much can this person bring something that's new to our team? Force yourself to find a way of say, what's new about them for the people here? You are specifically thinking about what they are doing relative to what is here, and focusing on diversity, focusing on experience that will make you better judges. Another thing you can do, it's a bit of a pop psych favorite, but is, does she like broccoli? This is an experiment, which is kind of a famous, it's called the broccoli test if you want to look it up. You can ask yourself this question anytime before you need to evaluate someone on something that matters. It sounds silly and it's not going to solve all of prejudice ever, but experimentally with fMRI machine scanners, so you know it's true, experimentally, if you get people to say, how much does this person like broccoli, before you make a judgment of them, you do switch them into an individuating mindset, where they're now thinking about this person specifically. The final thing you can do is gather as much information you can about this person as possible. And this is especially important if you can't help social category information. So anything that's to do with appearance, like gender, ethnicity, age, those tend to be immediate and really strong social categories that get activated. So there's a trick called multiple categorization, which is where you kind of blow out that categorization with as much information as possible. So if I tell you, okay, yeah, this person is a middle-aged woman, but they're also a Kiwi, they like rugby, they're a vegetarian, they're a coffee drinker, they like reading sci-fi, and they have a mortgage. If you can increase the amount of information where you're getting shared categories with people. So I've tried to pick some here that will hopefully resonate with the audience. The more you've got shared categories that overlap, the more you play down those initial big categories like age, gender, and ethnicity. So I'll wrap things up here. Here are the key takeaways. In any job, you need to be watching out for category indicators. Anything that's a claim about what women are, what non-binary people should be doing, those are flashing warning lights for you to pay attention. Whenever possible, when you're evaluating someone, when you're trying to infer information, avoid category information and pursue individuating information, even if the only opportunity you have to do this is ask yourself if they like broccoli, and identify the benefits of increasing diversity. I think people get grumpy about tackling prejudice, but actually tackling prejudice means that we are going to get a lot better at our jobs because we're going to bring in a heap more diversity, and we will be exposed to so many more opportunities than we would have otherwise been before. All right, that is it from me. I'm now going to turn it over to Hedvig and the Q&A panel, and we can have a chat about gender discrimination or whatever you want to talk about.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. That sounds super straightforward, actually. Not that difficult. Probably needs a little bit of headspace to actually do this, but yeah, amazing. We can do something about it. I like that positive note. So
yeah, I always try and be positive with sad things, and I try and be sad with positive things. So anytime I'm talking about relationships and love, I think I end it quite sadly. But this one's a sad topic, so I do want to end it on an optimistic note because I think it is getting better. Yeah, that's really cool. So until the first people put in some questions into the Q&A box, I have one for you. So I wondered when you said that sexism is related to negative relationship outcomes. So people being, so what did you mean there? Is it like people being less happy in their relationship then, or, and what do you think is the mechanism there? Why would that be? Yeah, I love those questions. So for the first one of what exactly makes a relationship worse, This is a case where you can go down the list and pick your favorite evaluation of a relationship. So for people who endorse really hostile gender stereotypes, where they have extreme views about the negativity and those negative characteristics of men and women, we find that those people have more relationship problems. So things like difficulties with managing kids, difficulties with communication. They have lower relationship satisfaction. We just get people to ask how happy you are with your relationship. And the third indicator we tend to use is how much conflict, how much arguing is there in the relationship. For the mechanism, we've looked at a couple. The main ones we've found are when you find biased perceptions, which is where the things that people are reporting are happening in their relationship are not at all what their partner thinks is happening and not at all what observers are seeing happen. So if you get like observers to record a couple having a conversation, then they go away and they say, that was a bit negative. The observers don't see it, their partner doesn't see it. It's basically all in their heads. So, and it makes sense. If someone is coming into a relationship believing that men and women in society are continually fighting for status, that men at any time could be tricked into a relationship, they are going to invent that into their relationship. So every time they see their partner do something, that's being filtered through a stereotype. And observers can't see it and their partner can't see it, which is rough, right? Like imagine being the partner where you're constantly saying, I don't know what I'm doing wrong because everything I'm doing seems to me like it's positive, but I'm continually being told by the other person it's negative. Makes it really difficult to resolve problems. So yeah. So there's a couple of things in chat and in the Q&A.
I'm going to get them to you. So one of the questions is quite interesting. So if you think, based on this social category problem, if you think that the recent talk about vulnerability of rural Maori getting access to vaccination is actually probably damaging, and to make that as a category, vulnerable category?
Yeah, I absolutely do. And these are things that need to be changed in the framing, because there is a group. So we need to get people vaccinated. Let's just take that as a true statement about the world. And we have all of these efforts, but often our efforts get filtered through those same kinds of stereotyping, where the protective tendency turns into this kind of thing that's loaded with pity. It's like, oh, this group doesn't understand. We need to help out this group, and overdoing things. So saying, okay, we will make it easier for this group by turning up with all of this stuff and getting them to do it. And what you do there is it seems like you're helping, but actually you're taking away autonomy, decision-making, and agency. So a better strategy is the first thing is just to understand why any group is resistant. There's got to be a reason. And the second thing is supporting rather than telling. So rather than patronizingly say, this group doesn't have enough, we need to give them, say, okay, I will go out and talk to this group and ask them what resources they need. And we can help we can be the other way around, right? We can be the people who are like, here are the resources. You can have the agency for your group to decide what is the best way to do this. So, yeah.
Another one is, does seeing people who fit the stereotype reinforce the stereotype? Do we need to do something to immune ourselves when we realize we are seeing those stereotypes in real life?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, right? Of the claim is, does anyone actually fit the stereotype or not? And if you're seeing people from the outset, expecting them to fit the stereotype, then they will. Not only in your own brain, but by the way you behave towards them, they'll behave in the way that they're used to behaving, and will go on in the cycle. I don't know if people could ever fit the stereotype, because like I said, the stereotypes aren't real. they're just things that are in our heads. And we're going to get too much philosophical soon, so I'll stop that track. But I think the second point of like, what can we do to immunize ourselves towards relying on stereotypes? And I think, yeah, I think that's a great goal to have. And genuinely, if you make it a goal, it will be a goal. So individuating people takes effort. It takes kind of that cognitive intention, because the reason that those social categories are so useful is they're shortcuts. They just make the world solved for you without having to think. So if you want to get rid of the stereotypes, you have to replace it with okay, I'm meeting someone new for the first time. How can I approach them and get to know them in a way that makes them feel like an individual and me know this person as an individual? If that sounds hard, it probably is, like by definition. Social categories are easy and lead to a lot of errors. Individuating is harder, but hopefully better. I think I've convinced everyone here. It seems like we're on board.
Yes, and we're going to put the effort in. Another one is if you have any tips for if you feel people or someone specifically is using a social category on you.
Yeah, there's a huge area I didn't get into around prejudice reduction and discrimination reduction, where you are being targeted with a prejudice or discrimination. And this is a really tough one to answer. And so the first thing I'll say is, I'm not qualified, basically. So I'm Pākehā, I'm a man. I'm part of the most advantaged group since I was born, but before I was born, I was still part of the most advantaged group even then. So I'm not the best person to be answering this question, but I can pass on some information from Jennifer Eberhardt, who was in the talk, who has some great stuff on this. And her advice, which I love, is that you don't have to do anything. And I think people often feel pressure to challenge discrimination when they see it. And unfortunately, that's exhausting. And it means that often you have to put yourself into situations where you're generating conflict. Sometimes it's impossible. So one of the classic ones for gender discrimination in the workplace is that women are called overly emotional, which is an impossible stereotype to counter, because if someone calls you overly emotional, that's offensive and will, by definition of how humans work, make you emotional. So you either have to be emotional in your response, or you have to suppress the emotions you're feeling, which looks like you're suppressing the emotions. Anything you do to challenge it feels like you're confirming it. So the first one is, you don't have to do anything that you don't want to. The second one is, if you confront it, that is a good thing, and you are totally within your rights to confront it whenever you see it. Because discrimination is about how you feel as a human being. There is no objective truth about what makes something discrimination or not in the psychological terms. In legal terms, there's a lot of nonsense, but also I can show you headlines and featuring legal terms, and they don't know anything about gender discrimination. I've gone on a little rant and I just lost my train of thought. So yeah, those are my two things. And I have a third thing, which is a call to everyone here, like me, who is part of an advantaged group in any way, is you are way more responsible than you think you are to stand up and challenge discrimination. Not only because as throughout your life, you haven't had to, but also because research sadly shows that the most effective discrimination reduction is when someone who's not personally offended by it challenges it. So if you're walking past someone else being discriminated against and you challenge it, people are much more likely to change their behavior because they feel like it's socially wrong, rather than the person who has been targeted by it challenging it, because it feels then like it's a dialogue and it's an argument. So yeah, you don't have to. It's good when you do, and definitely do it for other groups who experience discrimination.
Great. In
a supportive way. I should definitely emphasize the prior point. It's not your job to step in and tell everyone what you think and how you feel. It's your job to be supportive.
There's also an interesting comment that is relating, or probably made me comment or question if that's related to the recent problems that have been found based on AI. So that if you feed AI with a lot of resumes that are from men, then this means that they will pick up on that being a male characteristic.
That's absolutely right. Yeah. So there is inequality that exists in the world, and that's why social categories are like, sometimes social categories reflect a real gender inequality. And so that's why I added that it's not how the world should be. For example, one of my favorite headlines from a few years ago, favorite is a bad word to use, one of the most depressing, but like, oh, I love the way this information is packaged headlines, is there are more CEOs in New Zealand named Mark than there are all women CEOs in New Zealand. Like, that's the scope of gender inequality, right? And I didn't tell you that at the start, because it's my job to tell you about these biases that feed into those inequalities, not just shock you with inequalities. But yeah, the world is full of gigantic inequalities that feed into our brains, that feed into machine learning algorithms. So it will just spit out what's put in. And so, yeah, that's a great point, I think.
Apart from some other comments, I really want to put that question out. Do younger people, and you alluded a little bit to that with the children, do younger people rely less on traditional social categories? And if they do, what categories do they use to store information?
Everyone uses social categories for everything, but you can have more complex social categories. So that last slide, I talked about how you can do what's called multiple categorization of being a coffee drinker, having a mortgage, being a fan of a particular sport. So we don't have any evidence that younger people are less prejudiced, but it seems like what we call Generation Z, or the Zoomer generation, they're kind of bringing about a really cool social change specifically around gender, where it's no longer a gender binary as being the default and only existence, where multiple categorization is coming to play. But we will always need categories. So you can add categories, you can turn something into a dimension rather than a box, but our brain just needs these to cope with the world. So it's not that it's different, and unfortunately it's not going to solve prejudice either. But what will happen is that the information that goes into categories is going to change over time, and the flavor of prejudice is going to change over time. So it's not always going to be the case that men are stereotyped as being strong and women are stereotyped as being vulnerable to harm. The flavor of those can change, but they will change into something different. They will not disappear. Uh-oh, I've started getting sad again.
No.
Society is getting better slowly over time. I will say that.
As somebody commented, it's probably like what we need to do here is being the third parties, being the ones speak up and helping, and being like the helper, basically the non-bystander, basically. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, being supportive of that, and embracing diversity, like I said, and making it a positive thing. Yeah. And then one last one. If we are aware of our own privilege, what are the most effective ways to be an ally, or challenge the prejudices in a way that helps and doesn't instead make things worse?
Yeah, the two things to keep in mind from the models I was showing you is to make sure that groups always have, they're always in a cooperative role, and they always have agency. Those are the kind of the two main things. And often we get that balance off. We say, I want to cooperate so much that I take away agency from the groups involved. So the most effective way to help is actually the same rule. I know you said this wasn't going to be a relationship talk, but I could end this with a relationship tip, is the relationship advice that every relationship psychologist will tell you is the best thing to do is shut your mouth and listen. And that tends to be the key thing here. So yeah, close your mouth, don't tell people how to live their lives or what they should do, but listen to what they need and be supportive in that way. And same for your partner and your mum and your dog.
I love that. That was a very nice closing statement. Thank you so much, Matt. That was awesome. So what I would like to do is to thank you and all the other panelists who are or previous speakers, some of them are around, Dougal and Mark. And of course, also Carolyn, who the four of you gave so much interesting information. And I think it was really cool to see the good discussion as well. And just as a heads up, we're going to send out a little survey, very short, just a couple of questions. We want to hear what you liked, what topics you're interested in, if we should do this again, and what we should change. Hopefully, we can do this next time in person and actually do that with you, discuss it in a room together, and that will be much more fun. Thank you very much, Ngā mihi nui.
Oh, I also want to reiterate that from Mark. Thank you so much, Hedvig, for facilitating all of these talks. You've been a fantastic introducer and question sorter, reader, outer person. It's been really cool to see.
It's been very, very much fun, I have to say, with these amazing colleagues, really. Good to see you all. Mate wa. Next time, maybe next spring. We'll see. Have a good evening. Kia pai tō pō.